Hello everybody, this is Tim Hansen back again from MaxDepths.tv, and today we're going to be talking about creature shading, specifically with subsurface materials in Vray for Maya. Now the texture maps we'll be using in this tutorial were created in our training series Advanced Texturing Creature Painting in Mari and ZBrush, and if you're interested in following along from the very beginning, please head over to our website MaxDepths.tv and pick up your copy today. Now let's get started. So we've got our little creature here, and the first thing we're going to do, after we take a good look at him, get him set up where we want to keep him, let's go and check and make sure that he's got UVs. Let's make sure that nothing got funky in a file transfer or anything like that, but he has UVs, so we're good to go. So now, the first thing we want to do is go to our Vray tab and then go and apply a Vray displacement node. So you right click, apply single Vray displacement node, and you see it show up over here in your outliner. So right away, name it so you don't forget. Alright, creature displace. And then over here, you want to go up to the Attributes tab, Vray, and we'll start clicking and activating a number of these. So we'll start with Subdivision, Displacement Control, and Subdivision Displacement Quality. So then go under the Extra Vray Attributes, and we're gonna change a bunch of stuff in here to get this guy going. Alright, let's go to our render settings, make sure that we have Vray as our selected renderer. And we do. Go ahead and fire up the IPR. Drag that back over here. Alright, so we see nothing. Let's check the alpha. It is rendering something, so that tells us that we have no lights in our scene and we need to add a light. So let's just click Dome Light, fire it up, there we go. Now we can see something. Alright, he's there, everything's fine. We can right click, choose Select Object, and then click in the Vray frame buffer, and that automatically selects the object in the viewport, which is a handy dandy feature. You can also select the material that way as well, but first let's apply a Vray material. We'll just do a standard Vray material. We're not going to go for the SSS yet. And let's just give it something a little bit darker, just so it's easier to see. And turn on reflection, because we're going to need this to make sure that our displacement is working when we attach those files. It's just a little bit harder to see it on a shader that has no spec. So let's go back to that light dome and come down under the Options tab and turn on invisible. Because we don't want to see that solid white background. We just want to see our dude over a black. Alright. Cool. So coming back over to our Vray light, we want to activate Dome Texture and assign a texture. First, let's pause that IPR. And go surfing for a texture. Open a file read node, name it immediately HDRI. You don't want to have a bunch of file read nodes that are just Untitled 1, Untitled 2, Untitled 3, Untitled, whatever infinity. You need to be able to look in your outliner and easily and quickly identify what your nodes are. So I'm going to select this HDR that I shot in a park down the road from my house. Okay, and rename that light Sky Dome. Cool. And fire up our IPR again. Give it a moment to think, and there we go. Now we've got some lighting that's a little bit more interesting than just a solid white dome. And we can move around and see that we've got an accurately working IBL setup, image-based lighting. And now that we're happy with that, we can throw on a texture gamma to change the gamma, get it out and into linear, out of sRGB and into linear. And now you'll see that the colors are a little bit more representative of what they actually were in the photograph and on the day. All right, so now let's take down that intensity a bit so that it's not so crazy, just giving us a baseline of some nice lighting to work with. All right, that'll do it. Select the material again. And if we take our reflection glossiness up and change it to blend, you'll see we'll get a much tighter, intense reflection, because it's basically almost like a mirror with a roughness of solid 1, or a reflection glossiness of solid 1, I should say. All right, so let's narrow it down to just the area that we want to see here. And, oops, I had 2, only need 1. All right, so now let's go back to this Vray displacement node that we've added. We want to turn off render a subdivision surface just so that we can see what this displacement node does when we apply all the subdivision. Because basically, without this subdivision displacement node, it will render all faceted and polygonal because there's no smoothing on it. Let's fire that up one more time, and you'll see the difference between the smooth version and now you can see the unsmoothed version where he's all polygonal. So creature displacement node, render a subdivision surface, comes on by default. You add a displacement node and it will smooth your surface. Let's refresh my IPR and you'll see momentarily that we are smoothed again. Super simple. We do not want to subdivide our UVs. We want to use classic Catmull-Clark. We want to maintain continuity so that we don't get any seams or edges to show up once our displacement's applied. We do not want to filter our texture because that will just knock out information. Take our edge length down to 1 and our max subdivs to 8. Pretty standard. All right. Now let's apply our displacement material. Again, pull in a file read node, name it immediately, creature displace. Whoops, I already named the displacement node creature displace, so let me just change this real quick, because I hate it when I have a node that has, a 1 at the end, a 2 at the end, because I've used the same name multiple times. So. Okay, I'm going to turn off filter type because again, we don't want to filter this texture. Let's surf to our texture nodes. All right, and then you'll see our displacement apply itself, but you'll notice something's wrong. We do see that there is displacement on our guy, It's going in, it's punching in, it's pushing out. But down here, you got some real janky stuff going on. You can see, if we look at the chest, that you can see the repetition of the displacement for the eyes and the face. It's down here on the chest. Well, why is that? That's not right. We've got all kinds of displacement across our multi-tile setup, but that's because we did not activate our UDIM tiling mode. Because we have UDIM naming conventions with descending number counts, but unless we activate the tiling mode, it will use the first texture in the series and apply it to every UV tile. But now we've applied the UV tiling mode properly. It is now displacing properly. Or at least that's what we think it's doing. You'll notice that there are some artifacts, or what seems to be artifacting, going on. And there's a very specific reason why that happens. Vray, by default, does not account for the explicit displacement bounds of your 32-bit EXR. Essentially, it will push it outward, but it does not push it inward with a UDIM tiling method unless you tell it to. And we have to show it that it needs to push in just as much as it's pushing out. And you can see here in multiple places that we have outward displacement, but the negative is not being accounted for. And the way that we fix that is we need to allow for negative colors. And then also go back to our displacement. Move this over so we can see. Let me save this image so we've got a history so we can compare. So we go back to our displacement node and we go down to the explicit bounds, displacement bounds, and we want to set it from automatic to explicit. And then what we need to do is to tell Vray that it needs to account for an inverse level of negative displacement to complement the positive displacement. So you want to click here and then type in the RGB values -1. Okay, make sure it's set to RGB mode, and now you'll see that it's pushing inwards the way that it should be. Alright, so we'll wipe it, and you can see where we once did not have negative displacement, we now do. So we're pushing and pulling accurately the way that we need to be. And again, if you daisy chain your file read nodes like the old method, where if you got 8 UDIMs, you make 8 file read nodes, you path them all into each other and then path that into the displacement, you won't have to account for that explicit displacement bounds. But when you're using the new Maya UDIM tiling, by default mode, it does not essentially pass all the information onto Vray to let it know that it's supposed to push in as well as push out. So that's why if you just apply your displacement by default, you'll notice that you're getting those types of artifacting. So you see that, and you just need to remember that you got to go back, take it off of automatic, and put it on explicit, and give it a negative inverse of the positive value. All right, and so now I'll show you can also manipulate the amount of your displacement by using this displacement amount. You'll see by doubling it, we now have a lot more detail, but it also tends to exaggerate. You'll get sort of diminishing returns with this if you crank it too far. If you'll notice, like the little octopus suckers at the top of his head got pushed out really far. Around his eyes got pushed out pretty far. Now here I just exaggerated, like this thing turns into a friggin' gremlin. Yeah, maybe you want that. Maybe you don't. But this is a way to exaggerate the amount of displacement on your node. So let's throw that back down to 1.5. Now for the most part, I actually do like to overdrive my displacement just a little bit. Rarely will I leave it at the default displacement bounds of 1. I just, I like to push just a little bit more to really get that fine nook and cranny kind of detail. But that's going to be totally up to you and your taste. So let's just refine, and you can see that we're getting a lot more detail. But, don't push it too far, because especially if you have something rigged, if it's displacing more than it should be, you'll start getting things penetrating on itself and like that. But you can really give yourself just a little bit extra. You can squeeze a little bit extra blood out of that stone by taking the displacement amount and giving it just an extra push. But now I'm just gonna refine these areas real quick just so that we can do an apples to apples comparison. All right, now let's wipe it again, and you'll see the difference in overdriving the displacement and leaving it at the default of 1. You see, like I said, up there, you see the suckers get pushed out real far when you multiply that value. There's a lot more little cracks and pores and things that you see on the skin. But again, it's just an extra little thing that you can do at your discretion. So I'm going to set this to a little bit higher than the default, like I said. Pause that. All right. Now, let's select our dude, and we want to assign new material, and now we're going to go with the Vray Fast SSS 2. Name it Creature Base SSS Shader. And again, try and stay consistent. It will keep your scene clean. All right. Now let's fire up this IPR again and see what just the base SSS material will give us versus a standard blend. All right, there we go. So you see now our little buddy has some subsurface going on. It's looking very waxy, but you'll see that there are a number of presets. And we will start with Skin Pink. Kind of cool. Translucent, waxy, almost like a matte cap material from ZBrush. All right. Now I'm going to pause this, move it down for a second, go up to our render settings, render globals. I'm going to go to render elements, and I want to add render elements. Now, there are a number to choose from, and I have sort of a standard set that I use all the time. So I've created a little macro for it, a little mel script, which I will include in the scene files, should you like it. And this just has all of the passes that I normally use, and I just named in a way that's clean so that you're not always getting the extra Vray naming conventions that hop on. There's sometimes some extra verbiage than is necessary. So I just like to run this script and have my AOVs clean. And then now let's fire up that IPR again. Notice that there were no AOVs, no render passes. But now, if we go, give us a second to think. Now we go and check, and we have all of our AOVs and render passes. And now we can just use a down arrow and cycle through. And we're going to use this extensively to check our work. We're going to find where our noise is. We're going to find how our displacement's working, our bump, things like that. This is a great place to check that. Go through, we've got our GI, reflection, shadow, all the good stuff. Ah, the SSS pass. We're going to be in here a lot. You can see. Boop, boop, boop. Shadow, everything. We got everything you could ever want in here. And this is where we're gonna check our work. Anything you could ever need. All right, back to the start. So let's pause this. Select our material. And we started off with the skin pink, but there's a number of other ones. You can throw ketchup. That's a funky one. There's also milk, skin, marble, all kinds of stuff. Let's throw marble. A bunch of different preset looks. And there's a bunch of them in there that are pretty cool. That will get you a good starting point. But we are going to create our own shader here. And we're going to use the maps that we created in the Advanced Texturing Mari and ZBrush series. Diffuse color, file read node, creature, diff. All right, off with the filtering. And let's surf to our textures. There we go. Diffuse. Grab the first one in the chain. And then set our tiling mode to UDIM, because again, we painted these in Mari. Wait for that to load the chain. And what's up? Where's my texture? Where is everything? It's still this peachy. Why is that? Well, you have to go down to the diffuse amount and increase that. Otherwise, you're only going to be seeing 100% subsurface contribution. So if I take this guy and drag it to 100%, now we see 100% diffuse contribution and 0% subsurface contribution. And we don't want that, because otherwise what's the point of using an SSS material? So we are going to end up blending between the two, keeping diffuse in areas where we want it to be less scattering, and more scattering in the areas that we've predetermined by our maps. So take this back down, you can see 100% subsurface. And now we can apply another file read node, and this is going to be our subsurface texture. Filtering off. God, I wish I could make that off by default, but alas, no dice. SSS, give me number 1. Come on. There we go. Apply it. UDIM. Give it a second to load everything in the chain. Come on, baby. There we go. All right, so now this represents the subsurface matte, or material, I should say, that we painted in Mari. And this is representative of 100% of its contribution, which again, we're not going to do. we're going to blend between our diffuse map and our subsurface map. Going back and forth between, again, just so you could see. And we're going to create a file read node and bring in our subsurface mat. All right, create your SSS mat. Filter off, broken record. SSS mask, select, change the tiling mode to UDIM. Give it a second to think. Come on, come on, come on. You can do it. There we go. All right, so now we're blending between our subsurface material and our diffuse material. But you'll notice that we are actually blending the exact opposite amount of what we want with our mat. We're only letting through a teeny bit of diffuse and a ton of subsurface. We need to flip it around. And the way that we'll do that, select our object, map its material connections, drag this a little larger. All right, come back. Okay. So we need to find that subsurface mask texture, which is right here. Let's move it over to the side and let's load up a reverse node. Drop it down. And we're going to pipe that subsurface mat material into the reverse so that it will do exactly what it sounds like, which would be invert the mat and give us what we want, because from the beginning we were knocking out almost all the diffuse and letting through a ton of subsurface. We want to do the opposite. We want to let through a little subsurface and have a lot more diffuse. And this reverse will allow us to manipulate the mask that we have provided in a way that we intended it. So middle mouse button drag that onto the diffuse amount. Output, select the red, which is X, and throw it into the, where are you? Where are you? Diffuse amount. There we go. Now, if we go back, we'll see that we have, wait for it, there we go. Now we're getting the subsurface coming through in the thin areas that we decided that we wanted it to be, and it's not poking through in the areas that we decided to be diffuse. So there we go. Reverse node. Thank you very much. Close that. Well, just move to the side. All right. Now, take a look. Looking good. Looking fancy, looking snazzy. Select our material. And we can come to our specular layer, and what we want to do is not use any of this specular amount that comes inherent to the Vray SSS material. We want to control the spec, and we're going to do that by using blend nodes, Vray blends, because in creatures and things like that, things that are organic, they have multiple layers of scattering and spec and reflection, and only having one here in the SSS material is not going to give us what we want. So we're going to create our own. Okay. So start with our base SSS material. Alright, create a Vray blend. Middle mouse button drag our creature base into the base material. because it's going to be underneath everything. It is our base. And then we need to come back. There we go. We want to name creature blend shader. Creature blend SSS spec shader. And now we want to make our first coat material just a Vray material, standard material. Call it creature SSS coat wide, because this is going to be our broader spec. Okay. And in this, moving around super fast, we want to knock down the diffuse. We want no diffuse contribution at all. We are only interested in spec and reflection for this guy. And then now for the base wide, we want to use a ward BRDF type. And we need to actually assign this blend material so we can start seeing what we're doing. All right, fire it up again. And wait for it. So, we got something going on here. There's no spec contribution yet. Gotta go back to the material. We want to set it to additive mode, and now we'll get something going on. Because until you set it to additive, it won't plus that coat on top of the base material. You have to, if you're wanting to build spec, extra spec, you need to set it to additive so that it's like a coat coats. Otherwise, it'll totally cover, which is not what we want. But the reason we weren't seeing anything is because it was still set to 0, essentially, because black reflection equals no reflection. Even though your amount says 1, if your reflection color is black, that's still nothing. All right? But if we look, now we got something going on because we turn the reflection color to 1. And there won't be anything in the spec because the glossiness is set to 100% value of 1. In order for a spec to start showing up, you need to knock that down to at least 0.99 or below, because otherwise a value of 1 in the reflection glossiness is basically saying that, hey, I'm a mirror. And then we want to, because this is the wide coat, we want to take that reflection glossiness to a rougher, more broad value of, say, 0.7. And now we check him out. He is good. And go to the spec. Now you'll see that we will have spec because, again, you can't have a reflection glossiness value of 1 and then have it calculate spec. It needs to be 0.99 or below. All right. And then now we have a spec map. So let's pump that in there. Creature spec. Go find that texture. Oops, not there. We can go ahead and find our spec and attach that. as always, UDIM tiling mode. And now our spec reflects the maps that we had painted. So you can go in and see that there's breakup in that spec. And in the reflection. Alright, so that's our broad spec. And now we want to make our tight spec coat. So creature SSS coat tight shader. Now again, no diffuse component, and we're going to use GGX because GGX will give you a tighter, more pinpoint spec, which is what we want, as you can see here. And again, we can use our creature spec map, throw it into our amount. And we can see it reflected more so in our reflection. Get those tighter spec hits. That's how you get sort of that combination of a more wet look. Is you always have a broad sort of under spec and then a tight spec on anything that has any wetness to it. Okay, so that's looking good. We can increase that contribution, but we don't want to leave it at 1. We want to have a little bit of breakup, or a little bit of roughness, I should say. So let's do around 0.95. Yeah. Again, take a look through here. Spec, the reflect. And he's looking juicy. Like he just took a dip in that pond behind him and came out. Alright, so let's save this frame, and then I'm going to go back and we're going to completely eliminate any of that spec contribution just so I can show you one more time what we've done. So we've started out no spec, and we've introduced our own. Looking good. But now that we have our body looking the way that we want, sort of nice and juicy with our subsurface component, I want, and again, I'll just show you the difference between the broad spec so we've got the broad spec, but not that tight wet spec. Turn that back on. And now we're back. Okay, so the next thing that I want to do is I need to treat the paint of the face and the lips a little bit differently than the body, because they're inherently a different sort of material. The body, you know, is a fleshy, subsurfacey kind of thing, but our face has paint on it, and paint inherently has different qualities than something fleshy. So we're going to pause our IPR render. Actually, we'll just stop it. We're going to come back here, and let's break that out again. So we've got our Creature Blend Subsurface Spec shader. That is a combination of our base SSS material and two coat shaders, a wide and a tight. Now I want to make an additional blend material. And I want to call this one Creature Face. Whoops! I double clicked. Creature Face Paint Blend Shader. Alright, and as the base material of this, I want the Creature Blend. And then now for the coat material, I want just a standard Vray material. I'm going to call it Creature Face Paint. And here, I want to go back to my textures, and I want to use my diffuse. So Creature Diffuse into Diffuse. Okay. And let me select our little buddy. And I want to assign the new blend shader. And let's fire that up. Alright, let's move him back in position. Okay, so now we check out our situation. Select that material. Alright, and you can see now that as we have applied this creature face paint blend shader that has the creature face paint attached in a non-additive mode, so it's going to be an over, and we've used 100% blend amount, which means effectively this setup right now is giving us 0 contribution from our original creature blend with all the specs and the subsurface, and we're getting only the contribution from the V-Ray standard material as is. And now this is not what we're going to want. So what I want to do, and again just to illustrate that point, I go back, look at our previous render, and you can see that all of our spec and our subsurface component is now gone. So we're going to have to use one of the masks that we've created in Moody to put that detail back. So in the blend amount, I'm going to want to throw down a file node. We'll call this creature face paint matte, no filter, and here it is, face paint mask. Use our UDIM. Perfect. And now we can see that our subsurface is back. But in our spec, our face has been knocked way back, because that's what's in our map. Because the paint is going to be inherently less reflective and specky than just the normal skin. So everything is working as it should, and as we expect. So we've knocked that back. So now we've got our face paint layer. So we're all good there with face paint and with our flesh. And now I'm happy with how most of this stuff is looking. We've got just a little bit of spec hits now in the lips, whereas before it was kind of making them look a little bit plastic, a little plasticine. But let's say, just for sake of argument, we wanted a little bit more control over the spec on the lips. We could either introduce a whole new chain with another blend shader, or we could go back to our original in the chain, and we could either add our lip mask to the blend amount. So let's say that we want to do that. Let's say that we want to throw down creature lip mask, turn off filter, select our lip paint mask, turn on our tiling, and again, as we've done in the past, can throw down another reverse. Pump you into you. And in blend amount tight, just assign that there. And now you can see, oops, I guess I should have saved the image before I did that. Let's Control Z out of that. Put it back. Give it a moment to cook so we can really see what we're doing. Save that frame. Alright, and then now, go back and let's swap that for the reverse version of our lip mask. And now we can see that we've cut out a little bit of that speck on the lips. Alright, so now that we are happy with our creature and his body, no body issues here for this creature, we've got a nice fleshy, specky, wet kind of look. Our face paint is more diffuse and less specky. Now let's start talking about our eyeballs. So let's shut down that IPR for the moment. Move this down. Let's look at the components that make up our eye here. So essentially we have our eyes that we painted, and then we have an outside piece that is going to be essentially just our coat. So if you think about your eyes, there's an internal component and then an external component. And the way that we're going to handle that here is we're going to treat the creature eye right geo that we sculpted on that had that detail. We're going to treat that as the internal and the coat as the outside. So first, let's just go ahead and throw a shader down. Let me hide the coat. And again, you can see there's our little eyeball. Assign a new material. So if I hide the coat geo, reveal our eyes underneath, you can see we have our low-res meshes from ZBrush, which we will now apply our displacement maps to. So we'll have to do the same thing that we did for the body. Let's go Vray. Apply a single Vray displacement node. We'll call this one creature eye left. Oops. Displacement. And this one will be creature eye right. Displacement. And each one will have the same treatment that we did earlier, where we do not subdivide, we use Catmull-Clark, we keep our continuity. I like to give just a teensy bit more displacement, but you know what, it's just going to be the eye, so it's going to be okay. We'll just leave that alone. We won't even mess. Put that to 1, subdivs to 8, and now we won't have to worry about the displacement bounds because our eye is only on one UDIM. You only have to worry about manipulating the displacement bounds. Oops, wrong one. Try left. You only have to worry about manipulating the displacement bounds on objects that have multiple tiles. Currently, when you spread the multi-tiles across just using the UDIM token in the shader, actually, you know what? While I'm talking about it, let me just show it to you. So on this guy, in our displacement, using the UDIM tiling mode, for some reason at the moment, Vray does not automatically know to push inward on the negative. It would if you did it the old way, where you daisy chained a bunch of file nodes together. It would work that way, but that's why we have to do the shift on the displacement bounds. But for a single UDIM tile, it doesn't matter. You're fine with automatic. So that's a long way around to come back to a simple answer. Multi-tile, you have to shift the bounds. Single tile, you do not. So creature I left. Oops. Displacement. Creature I left. Alright, and we do not have to do tiling mode because it is not multiple tile. So now that guy is good. And you know what? Had one extra in there. Oh boy. Ah, because we just named the file node. Okay. Let's just make that lowercase. We'll do the same here. Just because I hate it when you have the same name on something that adds a numerical value after it. We'll just keep it clean. So run the gamut one more time. No subdivide. Captain Clark, you will get to a point where you can fire through these settings in your sleep. Just like me and all your friends. Creature I right displacement. No filter, filter off, right eye, select, and I neglected to allow negative colors. I gotta go back and do that to this guy as well. Otherwise, it won't displace inward because it won't recognize the float value. So negative colors. Now, let's hit render and see what kind of damage we did. Good way to check is to hit the normals. We can see there was no information there before, but now we wait for it. Aha! Wunderbar! We have our displacement. Cool. So that worked. Happy. Happy town. Now, let's worry about the shaders. So, we can assign a new material. Now we can throw down a additional subsurface material for this eyeball, but to be honest, for the extra calculation that you're going to get, it's not really worth it unless, you know, you're going to be like up in this dude's eyeball. We're not going to be up in his eyeball. So let's just do a standard material. And we can throw down our diffuse eyeball, creature eye, left, diffuse, no filtering. I wish I could turn that off in some kind of a preference, but alas, I cannot. Creature eye, left, diffuse. And aha! Wunderbar. So now we have our eyeball. Beautiful little friend. Okay, now we can give him a little bit of spec all on his own. Right. Very, very reflecty. We need to take the glossiness down just a bit in order to start generating that spec. Broaden it up just a touch. Very juicy, very juicy. Yeah, so there you go. So now we've got our juicy eyeball, but we want to turn our coat covering back on. And on that object, we want to assign a new material. Just a standard Vray material again. We want no diffuse color. We want lots of reflection. Go with blend. No, he's got shades, but it's not just about the reflection. It's about the refraction. Crank it up. And now we get to see down below to our eyeball, but we also get the added benefit of the more reflective outer layer, the wet layer essentially on your eye. But that reflection is a bit extreme. Let's broaden it up just a little bit. Okay, and knock the amount, let's say 0.85. Yeah, because I mean, if we go too extreme, and we'll lose too much of that glassy effect. So I mean, I guess we could do 0.65, 0.75, something in that range. And that's going to get us up in that eye. Getting that good reflection of our environment. Maybe I'll take it back up. Let's look at it. Let's say 0.8. Yeah. Yeah. But we want to, I mean, we could leave this Lock Fresnel IOR to refraction IOR. I guess we can do that because we don't want it to be glassy. We want it to be anything that's more flesh-based, skin-based is going to be a reflectance IOR of 1.3. Once you get into like the 1.8s, and that's more of a glass than a flesh. And metals are like in the 2s and 3s, things like that. So Mr. Silly Man and his eyeball is one good eye, his fish eye. Looking fine to me. Alright, so now let's do the same thing for his other eye. So, assign a new material. Creature eye, right shader. And actually, you know what? Did I not? I did not. I forgot to label the left eye. Creature eye, left shader. Just keeping it clean, keeping it classy. Keeping it classy. And I want to go back and add some more bump and roughness back into this. He's looking a little bit plasticky around here, but we can go back and do that. Creature eye, right. Diff. Shut it down, shut it down. Eyeball up. Engaged. Now we'll do the same. Turn that coat back on. Throw a new material. Where'd you go? There you go. Creature eye. Gloss shader. I need to go back and do that for you as well. Duh. Creature eye. Gloss. Left shader. I am all over the place. Alright. No diffuse component. Did I go with? Yes, I did. Yes, I did. Blinn. What do we have here? 915.915. And refraction color 1, IOR 1.3. And now Mr. Silly Man has some juicy, beady, bloodshot eyes. But I think I need to go back. Go back, young man. Creature eye right. Creature eye right. And I need to match 0.948. 0.948. Get that juice factor back in there. There we go. So now Mr. Silly Man is good to go. Alright, so now that we have everything assigned the way that we want, we can go back in and refine a few things. So let's say I want to go back in and refine some just extra bump in there. I just want some bump for free. I want some bump. So let me throw on bump normals. Start my IPR again. I want to get the lay of the land as it pertains to the standard bump. Alright, now take a look. Oh, not the AO. The bump. Show me the bump. We need more bump. Less, no bump. Okay. Alright, so let's use a little bit of a cheat. Because in some scenarios you'll get a normal map in addition to a displacement map. But you also don't really need to have that. You can actually generate a little bit of extra bump by manipulating your spec layer. So let's take our creature spec and let's drop it into the bump map component of our creature face paint shader. And we can see right away that, boom, it threw down some extra bump. So let me see where we were before, and now tossing our spec in there. But one thing you'll notice is that technically it's exactly wrong. It needs to be the opposite way, because if you look, say here are our crack lines. Our crack lines are being, how many times do you think you would hear that in your life? Our crack lines are pushing outward, but it needs to be the paint that pushes outward. So that's a pretty simple fix. We use our good old friend, friendly neighborhood reverse. So creature face paint. Let's map those connections. So we want our creature face paint shader. And let's go ahead and just kill that connection to the bump. Let's throw down a reverse and run. Oopsie. Come on. Into the bump. And now, aha! Now our paint is what's bumping outward and not the no paint. And we can see, we'll give it a second to refine just a little bit more. And we're going to get that little bit, oop, phone call. I reject you, phone call. We get that little bit of extra detail by giving ourselves some extra bump as it pertains to our paint using our spec map. Now let's say that bump is maybe a little bit too bumpy because it's just paint. So we can go back to our shader and let's take that bump down by half. Let's decrease the delta scale. All right, and watch that. Refine. And I think we're looking good. So now let's go back and recap where we're at with our shader. We have two levels of blends, all starting off first with the base creature subsurface layer, and then that layer has two coats with our creature base, wide, and tight. That goes into our first blend, and then from our first blend into our second with the face paint over top of all of our skin type materials, our fleshy materials. So now that we've done that, I think we're going to want to do something a little bit more interesting with our lighting. Because right now our lighting is pretty flat and even. We're going to need to do something a bit more nuanced. So let's throw down a V-Ray sun and knock that intensity down a bit. Okay. And then let's move it around so we can grab the sun, and then as we drag that around it's going to change our lighting. So let's turn off our history first really quick so we can see what we're doing. And to help us really kind of see what our textures and our look dev and shaders are really doing for us, you know, we need to do something a bit more dramatic with the lighting. So we get kind of a rim lit glancing angle where we could really start to feel highlights and shadow and see what all of our work has been for. Okay. Starting to look more interesting. All right. So there's a little bit too much fill. So let's go back to our dome and let's knock that light down by a good deal. All right. So now we've got a bit more dramatic lighting that really accentuates everything that's going on in combination in our scene here. We've got nice rim light that is intense enough that it's going to exaggerate our subsurface. Move this over here. Let's tweak a little bit more glancing angle. All right. Cool. And then if we manipulate our turbidity and increase that, it's going to warm our light up. It's almost like taking it to a lower Kelvin temperature or giving it a warmer, more sunset-y kind of sky. All right, so now there's a little bit more warmth in our scene, and we can really feel our subsurface now starting to pop because there's enough light intensity to really penetrate that model. Our face paint's looking sweet, just as we intended. All right, so everything's kind of working in the scene here. Now we can go back and I want to start manipulating our base diffuse texture. If I go and select our material, okay, now on the creature diffuse layer you'll see under the color balance there's an exposure tab. I want to start taking that exposure in the negative because I want to darken our texture a bit. Give us something a bit more moody, foreboding. So take that intensity a little lower. It's okay, so now it's a little strong. I think I'm going to walk that back because I want to walk the detail. I want to walk the line between darkening but not losing too much detail. So I think negative 1.75 is probably going to work for us. We're starting to get some interesting things going on in our details and our subsurface and the skin. But you'll notice that also the face paint has been affected by this exposure. And we don't want that. We just want the fleshy bits to be enhanced. So we can go down to our paint, and because our paint was using the same diffuse map as our subsurface, let's break that connection, and then let's make a new file read node, and we're going to read in the same diffuse texture that we painted, but now this one's not going to have the exposure on it, so it's going to maintain its luminance, and it's really going to pop that paint. It's really going to pop it on his face. So creature face paint diff, surf2 and load. And wait for it. Yeah. Yeah, so now our face paint layer continues to pop. Let's go and look for a comparison with what we had before. Yeah, and you'll see that we really just sort of darkened it down and made it a lot more juicy and kind of evil. Cool. And then you can go the opposite direction and really lighten things up, and then kind of turn it into a 1950s Batman TV show kind of Joker. Real cotton candy, or like something from a Barney cartoon nightmare. But I think we're gonna leave it. We're gonna lock in at that negative 1.75 value because it makes him look tougher. Look less like something I want to run into in the forest. All right, and now that's just an example of something cool you can do to manipulate your texture without having to go all the way back to Mari and repaint something. You can just use a node and change everything with a small value change. So now let's save that. And I want to go back to my coat tight, and I want to broaden that spec a little bit. It's a little bit, I don't want it to look so wet. The spec hits are just a little tighter than I want. All right, go back, let's A/B it so we can compare. Yeah. Let's knock this down a bit more. It's not quite as dramatic of a change as I was looking for, but I think that's looking pretty good now. Just broadens the spec a bit. And if I zoom in, we can see a little bit better the change that we made. Yeah. Let's get in close and tight. Let's refine this area just a little bit more with the ray gun. And do our A/B. Yeah, you can see that tight spec has been broadened out a bit. And it just feels a little bit more organic. So it's looking good. Let's just let the scene refine. And then now you'll notice in some of these glancing angles and areas on the side, it's a little smooth.
So we can do something here, another little hack that we can add more detail, the more fine sort of roughness, pory detail without having to go back to ZBrush. We just go back down to our base layer, and in our bump and normal mapping, we just want to add, where is it? Where are you? Where are you? Simplex noise, simplex noise. All right. Ah, there you go. So let's throw down a simplex noise. Wait for that to refine just a little bit. And then now if we go to our bump normals, we can see, boom, there's something crazy on there. But we don't want that pattern to be so large. So we're going to take that scale and we're going to multiply it by tens. So go into 60. All right, so now you see it's getting a little tighter, a little finer. So now if we go to 600, now we got something that is going to break up those smooth areas, those areas that were lacking any kind of real fine, tight detail, and it gives us something that looks more like an elephanty skin, which is really cool because, again, we didn't have to go back to ZBrush to add just that one last little layer of complexity. Something that's very subtle, but that it will read. It'll help sell our material. Okay, yeah, see, and then if we A/B, you can see, look at the difference. Just that subtle little bit of breakup on the skin that just gives it that little extra, little something extra. And now it's subtle, but it is there, and it's helping us out. Cool. Yeah, you see it breaks up the lighting as well. Look in those highlights and down in places like on the chest and on the tentacles. It'll really break it up. Let's see. If I take it back to 60, I think that it's going to be more apparent, but it's going to be too on the nose. Yeah, it starts to make it look like alligator skin as opposed to elephant skin. So take that back to 600. We'll lock in, let that refine just a bit more. Yeah. All right. We'll A/B for comparison, and you can really feel it in the highlights. Take off the ray gun, let it just refine evenly. Give it a second to cook. Yeah, you can really feel it in the areas with the rim light and the highlights. Nice. Nice. Okay, moving on. So now that our materials are all doing what we want them to, move this to the side. Let's start manipulating our camera to help us with a more photographic look. So we'll turn on physical camera, and under extra attributes, keep going, extra Vray attributes down there at the bottom. Now we can treat as physical camera, and you can see that our lighting has been affected, and that's because it comes in as the default settings We want to go in and knock down our f-stop, and that's going to give us more lighting, because if you know anything about photography, the lower the f-stop, the more light you're going to let in, and enable depth of field. Set our focus point. Nice. But you'll also know from photography that the lower your f number, the more wide open your aperture is. So that gives your depth of field a really super shallow depth of field. So let's walk that f number back up, but you'll see that our lighting levels are going to drop back down again. So the way that we need to compensate for that is with our ISO. So start taking up our ISOs by an order of magnitude. So from 100 to 200, 200 to 400, essentially you're doubling your light with each stop. 1600. And we can now start to dial in and see what we've got. So now that depth of field is far less shallow, but it's still pretty shallow. But we can use the photographic nature of this physical cam to really start to give us more interesting, more photoreal, real world kind of looks. Let that refine. Okay. Looking good. Gives us that real sweet kind of creamy bokeh behind him. Really getting photographic. Nice. Go in, check our details. Yeah. Yeah, so we're just going to walk the line between our depth of field, playing with our F number until we get just the amount of depth of field that we want. And then each time we change the F number, we just compensate with ISO or shutter speed. So take this up again. Yeah. Because we want depth of field, but not too much. And now, if we go to our shutter speed, the larger the number for the shutter speed, that means the faster it's going to fire. And the faster it fires, the less light it lets in. So actually, if you take your shutter speed down to a lower number, then it allows more light to come inside. Go up and up. Faster the shutter speed, the less light. All right. So let's say around, yeah, we'll just put it back to our 200 and we'll just keep cranking on our ISO. Boom. There we go. Okay, looking good. Like what I'm getting here. The depth of field is shallow but not ridiculous. Got a nice bokeh behind. Our shaders looking good, looking juicy. Yeah. And so now we can start doing, you know, some little color corrections here in the frame buffer. Can reset everything. And first we can hit exposure. We can expose up or down. We can play with our highlight burn. Next we have our contrast levels. Tweak, tweak, tweak. And then white balance, where we can either add more warmth or more bluish tones. And it works on an inverse. You go towards the blue and it adds actually more warmth. You go towards the orange and it adds more cool. So let's say I like this. I like them a little bit more of a warm tone. All right. Knock it back just a little. And now we can start doing sort of our final adjustments as we close this out. All right, everything's looking nice. Get some nice warmth in those highlights. Cool. All right, so now let's make sure that everything looks good in a full render, because we've been looking at it in an IPR this whole time. And so let's check these highlight areas and make sure that they're not noisy. So let's shut down our IPR and fire off a full bucket render on just these areas so that we can spot check and make sure that our render is going to be clean with no noise. All right, and now I'll just speed this up so that you don't have to sit and watch my buckets drop. And we're going to pay attention to this area right here on the tip. All right, so we'll give that a second to cook, and we'll start to see that. Yeah, you see it there in the background first. Yeah, all that noise is going away, and we are actually sampled really well in this scene. Super smooth, super creamy. Do not change that color scheme, Windows. Thank you very much. And yeah, we did it. We did it, everybody. Cool. All right, so that's what we get in the end. We got our nice Vray subsurface material, and with a simple setup using 2 blends, a subsurface, a couple of spec coats, and an extra layer for paint, a little bit of Vray physical camera and sun and sky, and we're looking pretty good. So if you've enjoyed this series, I'd ask that you please head on over to maxsteps.tv/shops and check out the companion to this series, the Advanced Texturing with Mari and ZBrush, where we initially painted the textures that we used here in this tutorial today. So if everything is cool with you, I hope you have a great day, and thanks for watching. See you next time.